the concerned persons from companies, individuals, because it's a very serious matter. But priority is given to the media today, so the first questions will be accepted from the media first. So let me hand over to the Secretary General of IRU, Mr. Umberto di Pretto.
Thank you. I will express myself in English, so if you need to put on your headsets, perhaps give you a few moments to do that. I assume if I'm on channel 2, that means you should be on channel 1 for Russian. Everybody understands? I can proceed? Firstly, thank you all for coming. This is an issue that we need to discuss today that's of grave concern to the entire trade community. The ramifications of the letter issued on the 5th of July can have serious trade implications for Russia and all of Russia's trade partners. I'm here as representing the IRU, and it's important to say from the outset that the IRU has for over 60 years and with great success been managing the United Nations TIR Convention. We're at a point today where we have other regions, such as Africa and South America, that are knocking at our door to join this tried and tested facilitation instrument that not only facilitates trade, but secures trade. And the prime intent of the TIR Convention is to ensure that customs receives the taxes and excise duties owing to them. And that is the purpose of the TIR Convention: facilitate trade and ensure that customs receives what is rightfully owing to them. Now, the IRU, according to the United Nations TIR Convention, is mandated by the UN, thanks to Article 6.2 bis. It might be too technical, but just so you know that there is a legal instrument. Article 6.2 bis gives the IRU the mandate to manage the TIR system and the global guarantee chain. Now, from our position as the overall global guarantors of the system and as the managers of the TIR system, when we received this letter, we analyzed it immediately and also consulted with our top lawyers to say, is this in breach of the convention? And the opinion of the IRU, which is unanimously shared by the European Commissions and, more importantly, by the United Nations, is that if the measures foreseen in this letter come into effect, this would be a de facto breach of the TIR Convention. This is very important to note, because if there is a breach of the convention, if there is an actual denunciation of the convention, it is not the customs that can do this. It has to go to the foreign ministry. This has to be a decision of the government that says we are withdrawing from the convention. Now, you may want to ask the head of customs, and he will say we are not denouncing the convention, but the opinion of the IRU, the United Nations, and the European Commission is that these measures would de facto be a breach of the convention and therefore a denunciation of this convention. It's not only the IRU, the United Nations, and the European Commission that are calling on the Russian government to withdraw this letter, but it's also the Russian business community and your top business organizations, and I can cite them for you. It's the Russian Chamber of Commerce, Opora, which is your Association of Russian SMEs, the Dialovaya Russia, which is your Public Association of Nonprofit Organizations. I guess that was completely mispronounced. And your Russian Union of Industrialists and Entrepreneurs, the RSPP, have all written to your prime ministers saying, withdraw this letter, because all understand the economic ramifications and political ramifications of this move. Withdrawing from an international convention has serious ramifications. It's not just the economic ramifications, it's also the political ramifications. It says that Russia will not respect international law and commitments that it has made. And for the business environment, this sends a very strong message that we cannot have confidence in dealing with Russia. And this is very serious, and why it is that we have to have this letter withdrawn. And if there are problems with the TIR Convention, then it should be addressed through the competent channels, and that is through the United Nations. And I have no doubts that the Russian customs may have some concerns about the TIR Convention, as others do. But when bodies do have problems with the TIR Convention, the place to bring these problems is to the United Nations, to the competent bodies, so that these issues can be duly discussed and duly resolved. If that means that we change the convention, so be it. And the first party that would be in favor of making the convention even more efficient would be the IRU. As the managers of this convention, we do everything to make it as efficient as possible so we can even better serve trade. Let me just turn very briefly to the letter itself that was issued by the FCS. The grounds are threefold. The justifications are threefold. The first argument is that the guarantee provided and the debt that is incurred, I'm reading from the letter, incurred in connection with the violation of TIR procedure exceeds 20 billion rubles. Now, we are sitting down with customs and trying to see where on earth they come up with this figure, because this figure does not correspond to any ASMAP or IRU figures. And I have to say from the outset that the IRU and ASMAP are one. Our figures are ASMAP figures, and vice versa. So it's futile for the FCS to say, it is ASMAP's fault or blame ASMAP. It is the IRU, it is the global guarantee chain. If there is a problem in the global guarantee chain, they need to come to the IRU, not just ASMAP. Now, this question of 20 billion rubles, what it ignores is that in 2002, and even dating back to 1999, there were global agreements that basically extinguished the liability of the TIR guarantee chain from this debt. Now, this has been completely ignored. And it's very important that it is known to the international community that there are such global agreements. Indeed, there has been an emergency meeting of the TIR Executive Board, which is a United Nations body that looks at the functioning of the TIR system. And there has been an emergency meeting convened for the 27th of August to precisely see what are these allegations and what does the IRU have to say about these. And we will table all of the documentation that proves that all of the assumptions made in the letter are completely unfounded. And the first assumption that is false is that there's an outstanding debt of the TIR guarantee chain of 20 billion rubles. The global agreements that have been signed were signed at that time by the head of customs. It was Mr. Vanin at the time. But the competent body for the TIR issues is the Ministry of Transport. The Ministry of Transport reported to the United Nations that these global agreements have been signed to the full satisfaction of the Russian government. So not only have customs signed these global agreements extinguishing this debt from the TIR guarantee chain, but the government, as represented to the Ministry of Transport, has confirmed to the United Nations that this was done to the full satisfaction of the Russian Federation. So, for all intents and purposes, these debts have been extinguished in our guarantee chain. The next claim is that there has been an increase. I'll read word for word. There has been a tendency to increase the debt in recent years, meaning that there has been an increase in litigation or an increase in the number of claims. The exact opposite is true. Indeed, because of the global agreements, we worked hand in hand with Russian customs to put in place risk management measures that would actually help reduce the number of claims being brought, because we actually help reduce fraud in the system. And it's somewhat surprising to us that with the excellent cooperation we've had with Russian customs to put in place what is called today real-time safe tier, which allows us electronically to see the proper termination of a tier carnet, and also tier electronic pre-declarations, which allow transport operators to announce in advance that they're coming to the border and announce to the customs what they are carrying so that they can do their own risk assessment. That today we are told that in fact there's an increase in litigation, which is completely false. ASMAP has all the figures, as does the IRU, which we can share with you, which actually show that the tendency is completely reversed. There has been a tremendous decrease in the number of litigations with the tier system here in Russia, to the point where it has actually become exemplary. And the last point that is raised, it says, the security provided by ASMAP regarding its obligations towards the customs authorities does not correspond to the customs legislation of the Customs Union of the Russian Federation legislation on customs affairs. What this ignores is the supremacy of international law. I don't assume you're all students of international law, but those of you who are would know that when there is an international convention, it prevails over all national and regional laws. When a country agrees to sign a convention, that's what counts. That's what prevails. That's what has force. Anything else is secondary. So this is incorrect as well. So the foundation of the letter is flawed. Now, we can understand that the Russian Federation does have a debt, but this debt cannot be satisfied by the tier guarantee chain because this has been wiped out in the past through the global agreements. We are prepared to work with customs, with the Russian customs, to find solutions for future, to make the tier system even more effective for the trade community. And we have met, I'll say that we have met the last 2 days several times now with the customs. I have met with the head of customs on 2 occasions, and both times have repeated the request to have this letter withdrawn and that we sit down at a table and see how it is that we can further improve the tier system and bring these improvements to the competent tier bodies at the United Nations. Now, there's also been a working group that has been established, and you can hear more on this later, where we are looking precisely at the figures that have been presented by the Russian customs, going through these and trying to understand what is behind them, and also seeing how it is that the current litigations that are in course can be resolved even more quickly. And just to give you a figure, out of 110 claims that have been brought recently, 90 have already been settled with full payment to customs. So the rate is very, very impressive, and most of these are settled within 3 months. So the tier guarantee chain will continue doing everything possible to make certain that customs receive what is duly owing to them. That is the intent of the tier system. That is the intent of the IRU, of ASMAP, and of all the tier guaranteeing associations. That's why the system functions. With this, ladies and gentlemen of the press and other invited guests, may I perhaps give the floor now to the Director General of ASMAP, Mr. Kurushin, and then we will take questions collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pretto, esteemed ladies and gentlemen. It seems to me the General Secretary of IRU analyzed the data very carefully and presented it to you regarding the situation has developed in the TR system in the Russian Federation. I'll try to be brief to give you more time for questions. I'll try to be brief in making some comments on some points. First of all, as confirmation of guarantee chain, let me explain to those present that ASMAP is a chain of the guarantee, is a link of guarantee chain. So Customs Committee's references to ASMAP and information present in the media and on their site suggesting certain indignation regarding ASMAP. It's not so objective because ASMAP is just a link in the guarantee chain. The ultimate payer of regarding all the claims that occur in any country is the tier. So I want to comment to the good faith of ASMAP as far as the payment of customs. As far as customs payment, I would ask my colleagues to post information at the site to illustrate the work regarding claims over the last 3 years. In total from as far as claims from Customs Committee regarding TIR and ASMAP, there's a total of 105 claims regarding the payment of non-delivery of goods. Of 105, I will not cite even numbers because there are some numbers regarding the sums of those claims. 87 of claims have been paid by guarantee chain, considering them objective. 10 claims were seen by the guarantee chain as unfounded. So later on, those claims were that position was confirmed by courts as not subject to payment, and only 8 claims are still being considered. Those are claims the timeline has not come due yet on those claims. So those numbers illustrate and confirm that even over a period of 3 years, there's been no claims from Customs Committee regarding towards. There can be no claims towards from Customs Committee towards guaranteed chain. As far as the share of these claims, there's 105 claims need to be seen in the context of millions of carnet issued for in the Russian across the territory of Russian Federation. So even if the claims regarding non-delivery, it would still account for 0.0002%. So that's as regards the claims in this letter. As far as the debt, outstanding debt, back in the late 90s, early 2000, Mr. Umberto explained it very clearly. There was a global agreement that was signed by Mr. Vanin on behalf of the Customs Committee, and which was confirmed by appropriate organs, which was Minister of Transportation in Russia. It was confirmed to the effect that the crisis in the Russian Federation was settled. So there were no more complaints, no more claims remaining for the TIR system. Now, as far as the actions of the association with regards to the letter that was sent to us and that was sent to local customs by the head of the Customs Committee. First off, we conducted complete analysis of the situations. One of the elements of our analysis I've just shown you. We conduct the same kind of analysis over a period of 10 years. That's since the settlement of the previous crisis. So we have very clear data which is matching with what you saw on the screen over those 10 years. After we conducted consultations, we sent letters to explain our positions to all the organs of the executive authority that are concerned with TIR convention. Besides, board of the association addressed Deputy Prime Minister Mr. Shuvalov. We're very hopeful that we'll be getting soon reaction from the government soon. So the purpose of this address was to show the true state of affairs on the Russian market as far as the transport of goods. And we also were asking to set up interdepartmental group, task group, which will include representatives not just of ASMAP and TIR, but also independent experts who would be in a position to assess the situation and help adopt right decisions. So we're hoping this kind of group will be set up. Besides, Mr. Pretto said that only as recently as yesterday there was a meeting between heads of associations and heads of Customs Committee. Mr. Pretto was present, Mr. Itelsky were present there on behalf of IRU. Also, there was a representative of European Commission and Eurasian Commission in Russian Federation. The result of this meeting was setting up a working group. So far, it's not a departmental group. It's just a working group, including representatives of Customs and ASMAP, which it also includes representative of IRU, Mr. Itelsky. It's very good that our meeting is occurring after this working group was set up. Yesterday saw the first session of this working group. At last, finally, we've come to realize, we've come to see clearly what kind of claims, what kind of debts the Customs Committee had in mind. It was said clearly that practically, as far as the guaranteed chain, there are no claims really from the Customs for guaranteed chain. What the reference was to debts that developed back in their unstable times back in the 90s, so that debts are still recorded on the balance of Customs Committee, but Mr. Itelski did present data on all the agreements that were signed, and all the documents get confirmed that those debts no longer exist. And the second concern of Customs Committee, and that finally we realized what they were trying to say, that's the debt that fails to come under the cover of guarantee chain. I will not go into details of terminology, into special technologies here. Let me just say that every carnet covers, every tier carnet covers, in the event of non-delivery goods, the amount of customs payment to the sum of 60,000 euros. So you are perfectly aware that there could be transport of expensive goods where Customs Committee may considerably exceed 60,000. So the guarantee chain covered as far as the cases of non-delivery of goods in the Russian Federation over the last 10 years. So they talked about a period of 3 years. 3 years, over 60,000 euros for every case of non-delivery of goods, which is considered objective. But the difference above 60,000, it's not covered, but this sum falls out of the convention of tier. So that begs the question, why, when the transport of goods was done according to the procedure of tier, and customs inspectors saw that the limit of liability exceeded 60,000, why the trucks were not put into convoy? Because this measure existed at the time. So if this was not done, this measure was not adopted, it would be appropriate now to go and ask the customs officers who actually allowed this lapse to occur. It's still possible to do. So it should be a matter for the Customs Committee how to conduct themselves in such situations. So as far as the guarantee chain, as far as we could gather from the meeting yesterday, there are no claims for the guarantee chain. All the non-deliveries were seen as objective and that were recognized by the guarantee chain. They were all paid for, all those non-delivery cases. The claims that were not recognized by the guarantee chain, there were court suits filed by Customs Committee, and all the suits they lost all the court suits. So the courts of Russian Federation actually sided with the guarantee chain in all those suits. So that's another thing I want to say. Claims made by Customs Committee and potential guarantors across Russia that may come into effect if the national procedure takes place in terms of the lowering guarantee. There are no grounds for that either. I won't go into detailed calculations. We presented those calculations to the media, but let me try to put it in simple words. Yes, additional support and guarantee across Russian Federation is foreseen if the letter by Mr. Belin takes effect. It's foreseen. It'll one can get a letter for about 1,500 rubles. Maybe it's a good price, unless you consider that until this guarantee is provided, you have to cross territories of foreign countries, and you only have to cross a territory of foreign countries only if you have TR carnet or if you have national support of respective countries and states. So you're perfectly aware that 1,500, it may be a small sum of money, but it will be an addition to the sum that carriers already pay in order to obtain TR carnet. And the final point I want to make before we hear your questions. When we analyzed the situation and realized that all the claims by Customs Committee are not founded, all the claims that described in the letter. So on behalf of the association, we filed suits at courts of various instances in order to rescind, cancel the letter of Customs Committee, and in order to protect the honor and dignity of association. I told Mr. Belin during our meeting this. It's not a secret, so the suits have been filed. We'll be waiting for verdicts of the courts. Esteemed participants, we are open to questions now. So when you ask your questions, I would ask you to introduce yourself and mention the media that you represent and who the question is for. naturally. We need a microphone because just a second, we'll give you a microphone. Alexei Kimovsky, Economic Service of TASS. You mentioned economical as well as political ramifications of such actions. Could you talk in more detail, perhaps, first about the possible economic ramifications, basically in terms of in monetary value, how much Russian Federation may stand to lose the budget and the Customs Committee? Maybe you could speak in more detail about possible losses by Russian Federation. Also, second, possible political ramifications of such decisions.
I don't want to start throwing numbers out there that could sound extremist or unfounded. I rather base it on fact. Firstly, if this measure were to go through, the Russian Federation would have to expect retaliatory measures from other countries. I don't think that the European Commission or other countries would just say, well, this is fine, we'll just accept this. There would be some sort of retaliatory measures which would have an economic impact. The total impact of that, what it would be, I can't measure it. I could be very pessimistic and say they would be devastating, or optimistic and say that it'll only make a small dent. But I don't believe that it'll only make a small dent. I think the ramifications would be closer towards devastating. Keeping in mind that your economy today has flat growth. The last thing you need is an impediment to trade. To have economic development, you need to have greater trade facilitation. And this would actually impede trade. It would make trade much more costly. And as such, your growth that today is flat would become perhaps negative growth. You can then do the calculations of what that will cost. A very real figure, from the day that this letter was published, the issuance of tier carnets at ASMAP was reduced 20%, just in this short period. So already there's a 20% reduction in trade by tier. And I do know that at one point, 50% of Russian trade was by tier. And this is just the beginning. This is just the publication of the letter, not even it taking effect. So there are huge, huge economic ramifications. I will not put a figure to it because I would just be fabricating it. But I can tell you that I don't even think we've even begun to understand the extent to which this will hurt the economy.
Прошу вас, Лера.
Yes, we need it for me. Sorry.
Information Agency Rex. My name is Mikhail Bычkov. My question is regards carnet, tier carnet, and also how it will be all taken into account. It's known that there's a very clear record of tier carnets regarding banking guarantees and as far as the international organizations. What's proposed seems to be proposed by customs is not regulated in any way. So my question is, possibly you have some information regarding how the actually Customs Committee is going to keep track of the number of carnets and the number of guarantees. So that's a question would be a question for, of course, Customs Committee. Vladimir Popov, Auto Transfer Portal Transfer. Considering that there's the huge sum of debt that was quoted, what number of trucks would have to come through the customs to generate this kind of size of debt? Thank you for your question. Basically, in our press release, we demonstrated that one of the advantages of tier carnet is the fact that It's at the same time, it's a function, with the function of transit declaration, it also provides a function of financial guarantee. So every tier carnet today in the territory of Russian Federation guarantees the payment of customs payments to the tune of 2.5 million rubles, which is around 60,000 euros. So to answer your question, it's enough to say, just to divide 16 by 2.5. So it was about as far as the number of trucks. Что касается
Another thing that we just continue to ignore is we look at times, especially during times of crisis, this is what is missing from the budget, or this is the debt that is accumulated because whatever reasons. What we fail to highlight is that the state budgets receive 99.999% of what they should have thanks to the tier system and its security. So you can show me a figure, and I can show you a figure that's much greater than what they actually received thanks to the security provided by tier. You have to understand that the IRU, as a global guarantor, issues every day, every working day, $1 billion in bank guarantees, every day. And half of the trade of tier is with Russia. So you can start doing the calculations of how much we issue in terms of guarantees to allow Russian trade to happen. And so when we look at figures, even the substantial figures that we see here, it's peanuts compared to what they're actually gaining thanks to the security provided by the tier system.
Еще вопрос, пожалуйста.
More questions? Oleg Bolshov, Interfax.
Mr. Pretto, have you ever been considering to turn to the WTO court, and what kind of measures do you expect from the European Commission to take effect if this letter comes into effect? Thank you.
Very good question. For one, the IRU, as an international non-governmental organization, has no right to bring any claims to the WTO. It has to be member states. This said, the tier system is seen today due to years and years of functioning as a trade facilitation instrument for the entire trade community. If all of a sudden this trade facilitation instrument is removed de facto, as is foreseen in this letter, I could see that there would be states that would bring this case to the WTO because it is a trade, it would create a new trade barrier for trade to Russia. So I could see that the states would want to, whether it be the European Commission or individual states, would want to take action vis-a-vis the World Trade Organization. Well, the measures would firstly be that it would go to the WTO Court of Arbitration to hear the case, and then once that is heard, then they determine what are the sanctions. And the benefits of the WTO is that it is an organization with teeth in it that can actually sanction the country that is imposing barriers to trade once you are a WTO member, as Russia now is. So that is to be determined. The measures would be determined by the WTO itself. But it could be penalties, it could be fines. There are a number of things that they could decide.
Да, пожалуйста. Нет, сзади вас, Лера.
Good day, newspaper Good Dog, Ekaterina Zakharova. If you could tell me, if the letter takes effect, how will it affect ordinary consumers? They talk about rising price in products. Will it be the case, and to what extent do you think?
We have to understand that any penalty on road transport is an even bigger penalty on the economy as a whole. That is, if we all of a sudden increase the price of road transport or doing business by road, it's going to dramatically increase the price of trade and therefore the final product and therefore the price to consumers. We've done analyses in the past and said that for every $1 in additional cost, the economy suffers $2. But this is in economies that are highly developed, such as France, Italy, UK. So every time we throw a trade impediment, this has a direct ramification on the economy, and who pays for this? It's the consumers, of course. The other issue is you will have some traders that will basically just say, I'm going to give up trading with Russia. So not only will you have increased consumer prices, you'll also have less products coming in, so less consumer choice.
Я попробую на практике сказать. На самом деле, я услышал ваш вопрос.
I heard your question. I'll try to put it in practical perspective. If, God forbid, this letter should take effect and become effective, it will mean greater costs of the transporters. So, like I said, the cost of the guarantee will be greater because of the national guarantee support, national guarantee. That's one thing. Also, while many of the road transporters operate in the small and medium-sized business sector, so we are perfectly aware many of them will not be able to operate further in the system. So there'll be a shortage of fleet of trucks that will drive costs of trucking and transport higher. The retaliatory measures taken by foreign states will also drive the costs of transports. That will further drive up the costs of transports. Will be passed along to. It's very clear that it will be passed to the greater costs of products. So clearly, the inflation will be greater in the country in question. As far as the numbers for banking guarantees, I understand that you're interested. We'll quote some of the numbers regarding banking guarantees. Since the second question was. Seems to proceed from the assumption that from the desire to get specific numbers, maybe in rubles, perhaps. So association did try to calculate some specific additional costs. Let me emphasize, like we said, it's just an expert opinion of the association at this point. We have a very simple approach to this. What this letter implied. This letter implies additional financial guarantee. These guarantees, in the context of road transportation, we think they will work in two forms: either banking guarantee or comfort letter. As far as letter of comfort, we provided you some information that regards specific calculations regarding specific transportation, so you can make your own conclusions. TIR provides maybe 3.5 trillion rubles worth of guarantees. The cost of banking guarantee in Russian Federation is about around 6%. So you can pick up a calculator and get appropriate numbers. Let me emphasize regarding as far as the expert assessment of the association, those additional costs will likely amount from 12 to 15 billion rubles a year. We can wonder about the precision of those calculations, but the magnitude of the numbers will be this.
We highlighted that in most economies, the small and medium-sized enterprises account for 90% of the labor force. That's where jobs are created, is with small and medium-sized companies. It's not with the multinationals. Multinationals have the means to be able to provide a guarantee to customs and say all our goods will go to and fro with this guarantee. Small and medium-sized enterprises require the tier system because it is an affordable and competitive system. So it is the SMEs that will be most impacted by the introduction of these additional costs. In my letter to your Prime Minister, this is what I highlighted, that for the Russian citizens, this letter must be withdrawn because it will be devastating for the economy and as a result devastating for the citizens of the Russian Federation.
Я бы хотел добавить, если позволите.
I would like to add to that, if you allow. Quite often, road transport is compared with water. The water typically flows where it's easier to flow. So extra impediments, extra procedures that may be put in place at the border with Russia will immediately lead to the business going away from Russia. So that will result in shortage of products, less delivery. So the economic effect will be hard to underestimate. It's going to be long term and very grave. Questions?
Zatashi in Moscow here. I have a question for Mr. Pretto. Does IRU consider or has studies to extend the international guarantee chain that they set up for Carnetier to the International Transit Convention, so to electronic transit declarations done beyond or without using Carnetier? Are there any studies running or plans to start such studies at IRU?
I'm afraid we don't understand your question because the International Transit Agreement is the TIR Convention. So I'm not understanding what you're saying. Sorry.
Now, the International Guarantee Chain is on the TIR Convention, but besides the TIR Convention, you have also NCTS in Europe and the International Transit Convention, where also other member states than Europe can join to. And they are not using Carnetier, so they are not using the TIR Convention, but the concept of an international guarantee chain could be an attractive issue to extend and to make the International Transit Convention more attractive. So discoupling the international guarantee chain from the TIR Convention and the use of the Carnetier could be an interesting study.
I will take it. Yeah. Thank you. It does not concern directly the problem we are having here in Russia. It's an interesting question, let's say, for the future. We are mandated by the United Nations to manage the TIR system according to the TIR Convention to provide the guarantees for TIR carnets. You're talking about other guarantee systems which exist outside of Russia in the European Union and some other countries, the NCTS system. The IRU does not provide guarantees for this guarantee system. It's a different system. We can always consider to become guarantors in the system to provide this service for operators, but let's say it's not our priority for the moment. It's important first to manage, let's say, successfully the TIR system, and then we will see.
But perhaps you do know that the TIR system and the NCTS system electronically are married. That is, if you have TIR carnets and you're going into the European Union, all the data is sent in advance, and the TIR information is fed into the NCTS information. So the two systems electronically are married, but the guarantees are different.
Ну что, средства массовой информации высказали свою заинтересованность.
Now the media have shown the interest. Maybe we could get questions from business community. Yes.
American Institute of Business and Economic, co-chair of the Customs Committee at AmCham. My question is, today was supposed to have been the original date of the, call it the stopping of the tier system. Through the lobbying of the business community, it's been pushed up to September 14th. How do you evaluate the possibility that it either may be withdrawn or, again, pushed up another month or whatever to evaluate the economic and political situation there? Thank you.
Very good question. If I had the answer to that, I'd be going home back to Geneva a much happier man. The fact that they did postpone already is a good sign. And with this time, it'll give the government, and I'm not saying just customs, but the government time to actually assess the situation and decide whether they really do want to be in breach of an international convention. And it is my hope, and in my prayers, I am asking God that His justice be served, and that in fact this be withdrawn. That this be withdrawn before, not even before the 14th of September, but before the meeting on the 27th of August of the TRXB. That would be my preference, because otherwise we would have to table documents that in a history that I rather keep in the past and talk more about partnership of the future than bringing up skeletons of the past. So it is my true hope that before the 27th of this month there is an actual withdrawal of the letter. If it doesn't happen, well, then we go to the meeting on the 27th, we submit our evidence, and if there's not a withdrawal by the 14th of September, perhaps the government will try to further postpone or implement. So, unfortunately, I'm not a fortune teller, and I can't tell you what they will decide. But I hope that common sense will prevail, and that they will do what is right and withdraw.
If I can add a clarification, Mr. De Pretto mentioned a meeting of the Tier XB, which takes place on 27 of August. Tier XB is the Tier Executive Board. It is an international body which is created by virtue of the UN TIR Convention, and which will hold an extraordinary meeting in Geneva on 27 of August to discuss the validity or non-validity of the Russian customs decision by virtue of the provisions of the UN TIR Convention. This will be a meeting at the United Nations with, and the body is composed of 9 specialists, customs specialists from countries which have signed the TIR Convention, and including Russia. And this body will take a decision which will evaluate what the Russian customs have done. However, this body is not the Russian customs. This body cannot decide on behalf of the Russian customs. So the letter will not be withdrawn at that meeting. But let's say it would give important international, I think, resonance to have a decision of this body on the 27th of August.
A question from the media. Newspaper Transport of Russia, Tatiana Larionova. As far as I understand, ASMAP is the only organization in Russia which represents interests of IRU. So, Customs Committee, considering of the counterproductive relations that seem to have developed with ASMAP, so there seems to be counter proposal expressed by a customs officer at the press conference. They seem to be appealing to the international community, suggesting setting up another international entity which would be competing with ASMAP on the market and would also represent IRU. What kind of expediency do you see in this? That would it make sense to set up another international body to compete with ASMAP?
These stories, and there's even the allegation that ASMAP is a monopoly. What is a monopoly? A monopoly is something where by being in that position of a monopoly, you can abuse your position. It would be the case if there were no alternatives, but there are other alternative guarantees, and it would be the case if the TIR convention was obligatory. TIR is an option. It's up to the trader to decide, do I want to use the TIR system, yes or no? And as such, in that sense, it is in no way a monopoly. And as is rightly cited by Mr. Kurushin, ASMAP is one of many guaranteeing associations around the world. So in that sense, it's not at all a monopoly. And again, you could even then say that the IRU and the TIR system is a monopoly. Not at all, simply because there are other options. You do not have to use TIR. If it was an obligation, then yes, you could argue quite forcefully that it is a monopoly, but it is not, because you have other options. I understand that here in Russia there are 6 other options that you can use to cross the border. This said, some 80 to 90% of those who do cross the border choose TIR because it is the most effective, the most efficient, the most secure. As for other members of the IRU, there could be other members of the IRU as long as they're prepared to work with ASMAP. Other guaranteeing associations, that doesn't work very well, because then you have a system where you just end up having conflict, and the whole idea of the TIR system is to have efficiency, not conflict.
Еще вопросы? Бизнесу все ясно? Да. Марин, пожалуйста.
It's all clear to business people? Maybe we'll give priority to the lady. Thank you for a chance to ask a question. In the customs letter, the letter made a reference to not liking the form of support of guarantee. Specifically, the agreement of insurance, which was referred to in the convention as the main form of guaranteeing obligations. Did you talk with the customs about this, and were the customs people aware that it's a norm of the international agreement? So there's nothing to stop Russia from introducing this similar or this kind of norm into national legislation too. Moreover, the form of guarantee that is really used by ASMAP. After all, is it an agreement of insurance or is it agreement of guarantee? That's a fairly technical question. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to explain the situation clearly enough. Yesterday, during the session of working group, we provided clarification to the customs officials the legal grounds that we feel determine the provisions of our agreement on guarantee. Yes, as of today, we have the effective agreement signed with customs officials in 2004. However, as the higher court arbitration stated, this is a civil legal relationship of a special kind. So the special feature of this agreement is that some of its provisions are already set by the existing convention. So in particular, TIR convention says that obligations of the guarantee association are secured by agreement of insurance. So in this case, we feel the other party clearly confuses the legal grounds on which our agreement on liabilities is built. It was never built on the grounds of either national legislation or on the national of the customs union. Always such relationships were built on the basis of existing legal norms of TIR convention directly. So we felt yesterday that our counterparts understood what we were saying, and so they took time out to maybe to rethink the situation. There's a young man there in line. Hello. Company near Mirland, Nikita Gubanov. A question for clarification to the head of ASMAP. You said that TIR might need national guarantee. Now let me give an example. For example, if the goods are produced in Europe and only cross one border of Russia or of customs union, will TIR be needed if there's only one border to cross, or maybe the guarantee suggested by customs will be enough? I didn't say that TIR will require extra guarantee. It's the letter of customs committee that suggested this. To answer your question, I would suggest we pick up press release. We have a specific example cited there of the transport of goods from Finland to Russian Federation and the costs that might be incurred by transporter. Of course, those costs will be passed on to the consumers. So you can pick up this press release with a specific example. I heard you say that working group was set up together with Customs Committee, and this working group helps resolve some issues. I'd like to learn whether the Customs Committee ever went to ask ASMAP to help resolve those issues before actually writing this letter. No, they never contacted ASMAP. Thank you. My name is Kharbata Turi. I represent TIR in Russian Federation. The conference that we saw on the internet, a Customs Committee representative said that allegedly ASMAP suggested some additional vouchers to complement TIR carnet. So the question whether it occurred, this kind of incident occurred, and what was it about?
slightly technical question, and again, not directly related to the problem that we have, but I'm happy to explain it. Around 1 year ago, the customs authorities of Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russian Federation requested IRU to try to find a solution to provide even higher guarantees for transport of high-value goods in cases where the 60,000 euro guarantee limit, which is provided by the TIR convention, would not be sufficient. We have worked internally with our associations, with our insurers, IT specialists to try to develop such a solution, and at the end of last year we proposed it to the customs authorities of the 3 countries. And this solution was called Tier Plus voucher. That's what you have probably heard about. So far, we have not received any reply, any direct reply, assessment from the Russian customs about this proposal of this additional solution that we proposed to them. In fact, it would give the possibility to increase the TIR guarantee limits for some specific transports from 60,000 euro to 160,000 euro. So we had proposed that to Russian customs. So far they have not replied. Other authorities were, let's say, more interested, and for example, Kazakh customs authorities have accepted this Tier Plus voucher, and it works in Kazakhstan only on the Kazakh territory for the time being, and Belarus is still considering it and was quite positive about it.
Еще есть вопросы? Осталось.
Any more questions? Anything else to clarify? Irina Furtsova, Russian Business Gazette. Customs letter, if my memory serves me well, it's called On International Transport with Tir Karnay, and the scariest passage speaks of placing the goods under the procedure of customs transit. If you don't speak about transit as such, when the truck comes from point A to point B, if you speak in general about the general transport of goods from overseas to Russia, is it necessary to place products under transit procedure, or because customs seems to be in favor of processing goods, documents at the border? You know what? As far as the for general public, we need to clarify what transit is, concept of transit, because there are different concepts in transport and customs legislation. You gave an example where freight passes at one point at the border and leaves the country at a different point at the country of the border. That's a transit as far as the transportation legislation. In the sense of customs legislation, customs transit, or as the customs legislation of the customs unit says, puts it, procedure of customs transit, that's the passing transport of goods under customs control from the border either to the point of destination in Russia or to the point of departure outside of Russian Federation. So in the sense of customs, the concept of transit includes both the transport across the country, as well as simply delivering goods to any point inside the country. So, answering your question, what's proposed by this letter concerns both kinds of transport inter and across the territory of Russian Federation. Marina Lepichev. Once again, I have a short comment to make. What the member of the media mentioned just now, the thing is, it's not possible to process the goods at the point of entry of the customs, because it's forbidden by the customs regulations. The customs points can only place the product under transit. So it has to be near the border place. So the products would have to be placed on the transit. That just to explain the technicality of it. And I have a question there also. You mentioned that in recent days you had meetings and worked within a framework of working group with representatives of European Economic Commission, Eurasian Economic Commission. How do they feel about Belarus and Kazakhstan parties? How do they feel about this situation in Russia? As far as I know, of course, they feel extremely negative, representatives of Belarus and Kazakhstan. As we are aware that day after tomorrow, on the 16th of August, there will be a meeting of 3 vice premiers of these countries. One of the items on the agenda of this meeting was initiated by Belarus and Kazakhstan, will be the situation with TR procedures in Russia. They're extremely concerned about this. Sure.
The meetings we had yesterday was the very first meeting of the working group, which was established the day before of yesterday. So far, there is no member of the Eurasian Economic Commission in that working group. What I think ASMAP has mentioned today is that we have proposed that this working group should be with various participants, not only Russian Customs, ASMAP and IRU as observers, but other competent Russian authorities and maybe other international or regional authorities, and of course the Eurasian Economic Commission. It would be good if they participate. Even we could imagine that the United Nations could participate to such a working group if its activities continue in the next few weeks.
Ilya Yashin, General Director of Production Association of Freight Transport. Mr. Debreda, thank you very much for the attention you gave to this issue. The only thing, not to criticize, of course, but just to suggest, 2 months have passed since the publication of this letter of Customs Committee, and during this time, I'm sorry, months. A month has passed since then. So, because it felt like it was 2 months. One felt it was like 2 months or a year. So during this month, the fall in the number of the carnets that were issued, 20% that you mentioned. So one would urge on you not to wait until the September 14th and try to get it reversed before, and all success to you in dealing with this. I would like to hear your comment on this, regarding this question. TR Convention was set up, I guess, primarily for more effective functioning of transport when crossing borders of the countries that are parties to this convention, with guaranteed support of the payment of all customs payments. So it's functions very successfully, including in Russia too. However, as all bureaucratic processes, they tend to improve themselves and to become more complicated. The result of which, in the past, the transport when crossing border with TIR was basically a passport of security, a passport of good faith and decency in terms of conducting international transport. Now, the functioning of transport, at least across the border of Russian Federation, it's not as effective now as it was. The functioning of transport across the border. So, question: do you see such actions on the part of Customs Committee of Russia as maybe as indirect violation or indirect impediment to the free functioning of convention? And the second, that's maybe one could ask perhaps you, that the working group that was set up, perhaps there should be recommendations for this group to work to simplify for the proper functioning of the convention, to do the work for more simple, for more efficient functioning of the TIR system. That will help improve the entire TIR system, not just in Russia.
Brief in answering. Regarding your first remark, my hope is that even today or tomorrow it'll be withdrawn, and I'll do everything until the 14th of September to make sure that we at a minimum have a postponement, but ideally have a withdrawal. so that we can move on to more constructive issues rather than having to deal with this issue that is taking all of our time, all of our holiday time, all of our time from our families. We're all dedicated all our time to this issue. So even if it seemed that the IRU was not very active, if that's your impression, we were working very hard, especially with the United Nations and the European Commission, to make sure that we all were of the same opinion and consulting to make sure that, how do we respond to this? And I think you've seen from the responses of the European Commission and the United Nations that we're all one in our voices opposing this action by customs. So more than that, we are working with our national member associations as well to make sure that we have the governments of their respective countries writing to the authorities here in Russia, expressing their opposition and request to withdraw this letter. I prefer to act rather than to make a lot of noise and show everybody what I'm doing. I hope that the results will speak louder than any press release or anything that I might do just to say, look how hard I'm working. I'd rather just people assess what I've done based on results. With regards to your other point, it's precisely the intent of the working group to sit down and say, well, how do we improve this? How do we look towards the future? And one of the issues will be, of course, if we can make the TIER Convention more efficient, then what can we propose to the competent TIER bodies that we can then actually achieve that greater efficiency and bring back what used to be, as you say, a passport that gets you basically in right away. Now, it's an interesting point you raise because the TIER system alone is extremely efficient. The problem is that then customs puts around all these other procedures around the TIER system, or other agencies come to the board and say, oh, well, we need to check this and we need to check that. So the benefits of the TIER are then reduced because of the other measures that are put in by other agencies. And that's why we're also arguing for a one-stop shop, basically, that you just show up, you pre-declare, and that you can then pass through. We're working very hard as well to implement what we call TIER EPD, TIER Electronic Pre-Declaration Green Lanes, whereby if I can send my information in advance to a customs, and this is what we're doing at the Turkish and Bulgarian border, where they send information in advance and the trucks then don't even really have to stop. They can theoretically just keep going right by, say, there's the truck that has already sent his declaration, he can keep moving on. So it'll be very, very, our intent is to make it that TIER is actually the driver, even greater facilitation, even greater security in trade and transport. Thank you.
Journal Russian engineer Valery Kernichenko, deputy editor. My question is for Mr. Pretto. Could you tell me, let's hope that we'll be able by joint ventures to get this letter withdrawn, letter of the Customs Committee. What kind of conclusion you'll make personally overall for IRU regarding the situation? What kind of conclusion you'll make afterwards? What will be your takeaway from this?
It's a really good question. I think I already have a conclusion in all of this, and that is the onus is on the IRU to be even closer with all the customs authorities. I think if we had better contact with the head of customs and with all heads of customs, we could avoid such situations. I mean, dialogue is the answer to everything. If the question was put, was ASMAP informed beforehand? And the answer was no. Was IRU informed beforehand? The answer was no. Was the UN informed beforehand? The answer is no. But if we could have a closer dialogue with all the heads of customs, and not just the Russian, but all the heads of customs, that we can really discuss what are the problems and find solutions. I'm a firm believer that there are no problems, there are only solutions. It's just a matter of sitting down, talking, and finding the solution. So I think that is a lesson to learn, that we need to have even closer contacts with all the heads of customs and all the decision makers to make sure that what we are doing meets real business needs. And if there are issues, if there are concerns, that they be voiced, that people don't keep them up against their chest, that they actually voice those concerns so we can address them. That's the very first conclusion I'll draw. There might be other conclusions later, but that's my first one that I'm leaving here today with. Thank you.
We have still 15 minutes more. Journal Transport Safety and Technologies, Konstantin Karzhevich. My question is for the ASMAP representatives regarding the losses by road transporters. These are not just direct financial costs to obtain a national guarantee. Did you try to estimate maybe the time-wise costs, such as maybe standing in line at the customs, queuing up customs at the points of entry, which have become kind of customary sight already? How far it might go in terms of increasing the time required for passing all the customs procedures, this additional guarantee, and whether it would affect. Maybe customs will just spend more time doing paperwork as opposed to real interception of some illegal cargoes across border. Basically, if you've provided an answer to this question, it's impossible to estimate it, but there's lots of factors that it will depend on. Our opinion, it's possible collapse at the border as far as the fleet of trucks, and there'll be huge lineups, huge queuing. More questions?
To give a last word, if anything, I'd make a last appeal, and that is all in the audience, whether it be the press or the business people in the audience or others, that we really consolidate our efforts now and do push for withdrawal of this letter in the interest of all parties concerned, and I would even say in the interest of customs. I think unfortunately they've painted themselves into a corner, and I really do hope that we can help them get out of this corner, and I hope that the government has the wisdom to instruct that this letter be withdrawn so that we can move ahead and look at a more constructive future and work on more positive issues, improving the system, making it more efficient, and working in partnership instead of having to deal with such crises that just take everybody's time and unfortunately don't really amount to much at the end. So I would implore the press to get the message out if you can, if you deem that the message is worth getting out to the government, to the heads, and I would even say that here it should be the president of the Russian Federation that needs to intervene to really set the issue straight for the Russian Federation. I'll tell you that when we signed the global agreements, the head of customs said when he came, I have instructions of President Putin to sign these global agreements. So it won't be the first time that he hears that he has to step in to resolve an issue having to do with TIR. So I do think ultimately it will be the head of government who should intervene and set the record straight so that we can start working on more positive things. Thank you for your attention and for your participation.
Спасибо, господин Умберто де Pretto. Я хотел бы сказать только, что вопрос, конечно...
Like to say, we still have things to do. Of course, you'll have more questions. We have 3 sites, websites, ASMAP, IRU.org, that's in English and French. There's also reference to the Russian language website, which we also support. So we'll post all the information. We're open to discussion. We're open to information. So if you can always contact Moscow office, me personally, my colleagues. You're welcome very much. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you very much for your attention, for your questions. We're hoping the crisis will be passed and resolved.